Well, good morning. Excuse the delay. I can't always tell when this machine's actually switching on and recording stuff. So here we are in this new focus of thinking about texts over the summer from Hebrews 11, the by faith series of passages. And we're in the Abraham section of Hebrews 11, verses 8 to 10. I said yesterday that I'd talk about disappointment or things not turning out as expected. And I think that's the way we should read this. Hebrews 11, it says about Abraham, 11 verse 9, by faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. That, I think, is a statement about things not turning out quite the way you might have thought. If you want to read Abraham's journey, you can go down to Genesis chapter 12, and that's where it records his progress, the promises God made to him. Then he's setting out, and he arrives. And there are some statements about what the land is like. And there's an ominous statement in there, chapter 12, verse 6. It says, and the Canaanites were living in the land at that time. That's ominous because, of course, they are the original occupants. They have their established cities. And so Abraham was unable to build. He didn't own any property. He spent the rest of his life as a nomad in that land. Don't you think he had a slight sinking feeling when he realized this was what's going to happen? Well, a bit like going on holiday, isn't it? You go on holiday and you get there and the hotel's not finished. And you think, what have we let ourselves in for? And certainly things, therefore, didn't appear to be finished for Abraham. So what can we say about this when events don't turn out quite as we expect? Well, it happens quite often in the Bible, actually. So let's go to another place and we'll just think about the Apostle Paul. And he writes something in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. You can read there about his, well, let's not call it disappointment. Let's say things didn't turn out as he expected. He writes in 2 Corinthians 1 about the great hardships they experienced. We don't know what they were, just how serious and devastating they were. So in chapter 1, verse 8, 2 Corinthians 1, verse 8, he talks about the hardships that were so serious, he says, that they were beyond our ability to endure. And we despaired even of life itself. And then he goes on to say, in our hearts we felt the sentence of death. That's quite a serious amount to say about something that's going wrong. We don't know what it was. It could have been, some people speculate, the threat of execution. Some people think, well, was he threatened with the arena, being thrown to the lions or whatever? We don't know. But in chapter 1, verse 9, 2 Corinthians 1, verse 9, he actually gives a reason for it. He says, this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. You should make a note of that verse, actually. I think you'll be needing it at some point in life. Chapter 2 Corinthians 1, verse 9. What he's saying is, well, what do failure and disappointment and setback and dashed hopes do for us? Well, they drive us to God because they show how inadequate we are, how weak, and how prone to trust ourselves. They remind us how much we need God rather than ourselves. Because God, as he says, he goes on to say, this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. That's why we trust him, because he raises the dead. And I don't think he just means eternal life after death. I think he means, well, he does. He talks about deliverance and help and God's hand in your life, even through those difficulties. He delivers us in the present. He builds something out of the devastating failure. He builds something good and positive out of the things that have gone wrong. He's able to do that in a way that we are not. And so he calls us to realize actually that these things mean we should trust in him. Think about it. That's the opposite of what it normally is in our reaction. When something goes wrong, we feel in ourselves the need to take charge. You know how impatient you might get with somebody who does a job wrong, and you get all huffy and you say, come on, I'll do it instead. If you want a job doing well, you should do it yourself. Well, we do that with God as well. We see things go wrong and we think, well, actually, I need to take control back to myself. Whereas, in fact, Paul says it's the opposite. These things show us how much we need him and how weak we are. Actually, 2 Corinthians is all about Paul's weakness. And in chapter 12 of 2 Corinthians, verses 7 to 10, he talks about another incident that demonstrated just how weak he actually was. But it also revealed to him how God could help him and how God's power be shown in the weakness that he felt. His weakness opened the door for God's power, and so it is here. And so it is with us. Things might not be what we expect, but he can raise the dead. So we rely on him. And it is what we see with Abraham himself. All this talk about disappointment, we don't know what he actually felt about these things, but we do actually see what he did. If you look in Genesis 12 and 13, you'll see that when he travels and arrives, he builds an altar to God. He moves around somewhere else, he builds another altar to God. When he goes down to Egypt with the famine, part of the failure, if you like, realizes he's wrong, comes back, he builds an altar. Well, whatever he felt about these things, the expectations he had, we don't know, but his reaction to them was that he was not diverted from his trust in God. And that was a keynote to his whole life, his faith in God through all of these things. And that's why he's a model of faith for us. That's why he's called the man of faith. And that's why we follow in his footsteps. So whatever you face, whatever your expectations are, and however they are dealt with, the blows that they receive, don't let anything divert you from an active trust in God. So that's for today. Tomorrow, I'm going to think about Abraham living in a tent and what that means for us. And thank you for those of you who signed in and have said hello. I shall type something in a moment. But we'll see you and talk about tents tomorrow.